enterprise is very unique, and it's quite different from the enterprise in Europe. So I think that's I consider myself very fortunate to be a part of that enterprise. And to be able to use it, it's despite what I have said, it's a very flexible system. It's a very liberal system. It offers students a range of options, and people can switch disciplines anytime. And the graduate has, many courses to choose from. I think regulations are not very rigid. A great deal of autonomy. I think autonomy at every level, from department to professors, and in terms of, if I want to teach something different, it doesn't take me that much time to go through the process. For example, I can have a course formulated, and it is only my department primarily that has to approve the course. And then, of course, it has to go through other bodies in the university, but the whole process doesn't take more than 2 or 3 months. But it doesn't have to go outside the university.
Yeah.
I think we really have a huge challenge in academia in India, and things are not changing. I have been a product of that system, and I think I know it well, and I do maintain my interactions with a lot of colleagues and with a lot of institutions, and the change is very slow. But I think there has been more change, I would say, during the last 5 or 10 years than, say, maybe the 50 years.
True.
And I think it's largely brought about by young people like you, and who have a different worldview, who have a different way of working, who believe in collaboration, talking with each other, and have a different mindset. And so I remain very hopeful from that point of view.
Yes. So, well, fortunately for us, the YouTube Live is now working well, and we can begin our presentation for today.
So our 1 hour starts from now, or what implication it has? I can't hear anything.
Yes, sir, you can begin with the presentation, please.
I should begin the presentation? Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. Oh, I have to open the presentation just a minute. Can you see the presentation or no? Okay.
So we can't see the presentation.
Yeah, can you see it?
Yeah, now, yeah.
Okay. Good evening, everybody, and my very belated greetings day, that I'm just delighted to be with you this evening. Biodiversity. To start, Coach, telling you a little about my journey to the biodiversity world, and then that will take about a few minutes. We will start. Almost about 60 years ago, when as a first-year doctoral student, I had an opportunity to go to the Eastern Himalaya and take this toy train from Siliguri to Darjeeling. I think for first half an hour, train rolled through tea estates, and then at Sukna, it entered the foothills and started uphill. And it passed through this incredibly complex forest. My first experience in a lowland tropical forest. The train was moving very slowly. It will stop every 5 or 7 minutes, sometimes for a purpose, sometimes without a purpose. I couldn't understand. And I was just fascinated by life around me. I had grown up in Punjab. I had never experienced something like this. There were birds all around me, different colors, different sounds, butterflies, trees. And I was particularly interested in trees. That every tree I saw belonged to a different species. And later on, of course, I was to find out to a different species. The tree diversity in the rainforest, as we know, is very high. And later on, I also realized that I was passing through one of the world's greatest biodiversity hotspots. I didn't know then, because the term biodiversity was not coined at that time. The concept of biodiversity hotspots, that we have 35 global biodiversity hotspots that are extraordinarily rich. Biodiversity came around, I think, in the 90s, or was advanced in 90s. Fascinating experience. And as the train moved through the middle hills and came out of the fog, I could see different orchids of different shapes and sizes. In the slow-moving train, I could almost touch these orchids. And then this biodiversity really explodes as you reach the alpine zones. And there are, I think, approximately 110 species of primulas. We don't know. There might be 200 species. Similarly, there are 100 or 200 species of, we don't know. There might be more. Biodiversity is not fully explored. Rhododendrons, almost, again, 110 species. And on the Chinese side, perhaps 300 species more. Worldwide, I think there are about 800 species of rhododendrons. So this biodiversity is incredibly rich. These are the rhododendrons pollinated by sunbirds. And of course, we know in India, this biodiversity sustains of millions of people. Biodiversity feeds us, shelters us against environmental disasters. Biodiversity is critical for mitigating climate change. And we all know the role of biodiversity in the current pandemic. So all my life, I have pondered about conservation of biodiversity. I have explored biodiversity. I have monitored biodiversity. I have some experience in devising strategies for conservation of biodiversity. 2 years ago, I think a very unusual opportunity for me to really think something very, very big about biodiversity. And that was on biodiversity and human well-being. I felt India needed in biodiversity science, and this could only be done in the national mission mode. So my talk for the remaining, I think 15 or 20 minutes is divided into 3 parts. I'm going to talk about the national mission and the opportunities and challenges that the mission offers. And in that context, I will talk briefly about A-Tree, a think tank that I founded in Bangalore about 25 years ago. Because I was asked to talk about biodiversity and A-Tree, so I'm trying to combine these in one talk. I just want to make sure that everybody can hear me. Hello?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Okay. So the National Mission on Biodiversity, I think it was in the month of July 2018 that as a group we assembled in Bangalore, my colleagues and I, and we thought about a really national level project on biodiversity science. So we developed a concept note, which was presented to the Prime Minister's Science, Technology, Innovation and Advisory Council in October 2018. It was approved the next month by the council. And we were given a grant in 2019 to initiate the plans for the national mission. The Ministry of Environment, Forest, and Climate Change was the nodal ministry, and they appointed National Biodiversity Authority as the nodal agency with the Biodiversity Collaborative that we have assembled in Bangalore as an implementing agency. And I want to emphasize this was one of the 9 missions that was approved between October 2018 and January 2019 by the council. Let me give you a context why this mission and why I was thinking along these lines. I think we all know that India has 4 global biodiversity hotspots. It's one of the 17 mega diverse countries, and India, of course, is also origin of many crops. Although India has about 2% of the world's it has the global biodiversity. What people don't know often is that there are approximately 800,000 to 1 million species of plants and animals, including fungi in India. But only about 190,000 or so have been named. We don't know the number. I think it could be even hundreds, not more than 160. So 190,000 is a very liberal estimate. There are several species. We know they're probably out there, but we don't know what they are, where they are, and so on and so forth. So when we talk about the assessment of India's biodiversity, I think we have to keep in mind your campus, some species that has never been described. The centers. There are about 30,000 species, losing 10,000 or so algae, 1,000 flowering plants. The current list is I think maybe 16,000, 17,000 plants. I think there are about 3,000 more that remain to be described. Fungi, probably 10,000 are named, but possibly there are 100,000 more. So we have very little information about India's biodiversity. And again, I think it's important to keep in mind that even the species we know, I think perhaps a few hundred. Beyond those few hundred species, all we know about those species is that they have a name. We don't know anything about their biology. We don't know much about their distribution and the role they play in ecosystems and so on and so forth. On the other hand, India is among the countries with the highest rates of biodiversity loss, with a very high rate of land degradation. As you see in the map, the red areas are largely degraded with a very high rate of habitat fragmentation. And recently, Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBS, has estimated that 1 million species are at risk in terms of extinction globally. And I think if you translate that to India, it might be 80,000 species or so that are likely to go extinct, perhaps in this century, maybe by the middle of this century. And then, of course, increasingly, we have climate change and environmental disasters. Climate change is looming there. And when we talk about pandemic, I think the next few decades are not going to be easy. I think pandemic hopefully will be over in a year or two, but problems of that nature will persist for some time to come, unless we are smart and unless we start taking some steps. And of course, we know the water shortages and so on and so forth. Soil degradation is increasing. We face stagnating agricultural production, and of course, emerging diseases. This was a part of our plan. The emerging diseases was a very important component of the mission, as you will see when we proposed it, the idea in 2018. So in the mission, biodiversity is a key component of One Health, and I'll talk a little bit more about it. So it's a unique 10-year program supposed to be completed in 2 phases, 2020 to 25, and then 25 to 30. Of course, it's going to be delayed because we were hoping that the program actually will begin by April, May. We were making a lot of progress. We had submitted sort of the full proposal. The proposal was approved by the Minister of Environment and Forests and Climate Change way back in February. But then as soon as that happened, the pandemic started. So understandably, everything is on hold, although the group in Bangalore is very active and we continue to do a few things in a pilot phase and continue to develop a roadmap for the mission. So the idea is to really transform biodiversity science in India and link this transformation to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and many other national and international goals and missions. And I think the idea is to bring these challenges in climate change, in decline of ecosystem services, in agriculture and public health together to deal with these things in a very comprehensive manner. And of course, an important component of the program is to strengthen institutions such as ICER in Bhopal, non-government organizations, and local communities in biodiversity assessment and sustainable utilization of biological resources. We want to create a cadre of professionals trained to secure India's biodiversity, so that strengthening human capacity in India, in academia, and other organizations is a very, very important goal. And then finally, to initiate a mass movement to engage citizens in documenting and conserving biodiversity. We want every student, no matter what the status is, primary school, middle school, high school, college, university, to be proud of India's biodiversity, to know something about India's biodiversity. And we want to engage thousands of citizens, if not millions of citizens, in assessing biodiversity and getting interested in biodiversity. It's a very complex slide, and I will elaborate on this a little bit more, but I think it's important to keep in mind that a core of the program is what we call cataloging and mapping life of India. It has a Hindi name too, Nisarg Bharat, and I'll talk about that. But then there are other components on biodiversity and ecosystem services, biodiversity and agriculture, climate change, biodiversity and bioeconomy, biodiversity and capacity building, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, and biodiversity and health. And I'll talk about each of these in a minute, not spending more than a minute or so on each of these 7 components. But I think the important point to keep in mind is that each of these is linked with a particular aspect of human well-being. And the numbers you see in these components that are linked with the human well-being refer to United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and targets. And we have to keep in mind the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are all related to well-being of humans, well-being of the environment, well-being of our planet. So let's look at the first component. There's a lot of emphasis going to be on exploration, discovery, and genetic characterization of India's biodiversity. We want to develop a national framework for people's biodiversity registers, and then we want to develop a really sophisticated eco-informatics unit to catalog and map life of India, which will be very, very critical for monitoring biodiversity in India, apart from assessing biodiversity. The second component is on ecosystem services, and the idea is to map ecosystem services in selected locations in major biomes of India. And then the second component, which is a critical one, is how we can restore ecosystems in the vast areas that are degraded, as I showed you earlier in one of the presentations. And then, of course, as we know, in climate change mitigation, restoration is a key component of the national strategy. And so in this component, not only we want to deal with climate change, but also with other environmental disasters, examine the role of biodiversity in mitigating these disasters and coming up with the strategies that will help us put theory into practice. In agriculture, we want to enhance biodiversity in agricultural ecosystems to increase their resilience, to increase productivity, and of course to increase nutritional security, but more importantly, also the rural incomes. And here you see in the map a network of 60 sites or even more where the work will be carried on. Somebody might ask how the work will be carried on. You know, the work will be carried on by a number of teams working with each other, but half of the money allocated to the mission will be dispersed in the form of grants to institutions, a wide variety of institutions in all the 7 areas. So it is important to keep in mind that it is called National Mission for a purpose that we think that most individuals in the country, one way or the other, will have the opportunity to be engaged in the work of the mission. And of course, biodiversity health, I think you have been hearing a lot about it, we all have been, and how, you know, the health of the people is linked with healthy environments and healthy animals, and this is the One Health concept, and we need to develop it further, and the focus going to be emergence of infectious diseases, and India is again a hotspot for that, and then medicinal plant is going to be another very important component. As we come to the 6th component, biodiversity and bioeconomy, and we want to assess the market value of ecosystems, of bioresources, and again, see how we can really have economic models for large regeneration programs, for reimagining agriculture, for nature tourism, that will create thousands of jobs, and we can mainstream biodiversity in development. And I think from that point of view, you know, the work will also largely focus on aspirational districts. As many of you know, there are more than 100 districts that the government has designated as aspirational districts. And again, I think the idea there is how we mainstream. I think development is going to be the key parameter from a government's point of view in these aspirational districts, and we want to see, you know, how we can mainstream biodiversity into this development process and have a very different model of producing knowledge, co-producing knowledge for enhancing income from biodiversity-based livelihoods, from climate change, resilience, agroforestry production systems, and natural assets. I think this is the sort of the key component of this program I want to focus on. And of course, build local capacity for meeting sustainable development goals. So I think there are opportunities for us to create a new science which is integrative and which is transformative, and it is nurtured through collaborations and partnerships. It's natural science, which uses digital tools, artificial intelligence, tools like environmental DNA barcoding for assessing, monitoring, and sustainably using our biodiversity. A science that is linked with policy and societal needs, and a science that really focuses on communication and citizen science and education, and creates professionals and leaders to deal with the 21st century issues. And of course, there are challenges, and I think I have 2 more minutes, and I'll finish in half an hour as I had promised. These are in terms of the collaboration. It's not easy, as I was discussing with some of you before the seminar. Interdisciplinary, especially in India, fostering interdisciplinarity remains a challenge. And decentralization and democratization of institutions and science, which will be very critical for the success of the mission, remains a challenge. Now, we have tried to meet these challenges at ITRI, Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and the Environment, that I established, I think, 25 years ago with the help of my colleagues in Bangalore. And I think here I want to emphasize, at ITRI we explore, we generate knowledge. We use this knowledge to inform, and then we use this knowledge to engage local community. Science policy work is done by think tanks, and engagement is done by non-government organizations. And I think we are trying to design an institution where we can bring all these 3 things together: think tank, academy, and an NGO. It's a challenge, but we think it's worth doing. And I'll explain why it is worth the effort in a minute. So it's a global nonprofit that generates interdisciplinary knowledge to inform policy and practice towards conservation and sustainability study. Although we are only 25 years old, we have been ranked among the top 20 environmental think tanks in the world for several years, and among the top 3 in Asia. This is our institutional model. We have 2 centers for biodiversity and conservation, centers for environment and development, and they generate knowledge. And then we have an academy here for conservation and sustainability studies that anchors our innovative PhD program. But the knowledge that is generated here feeds into Center for Policy Action, Policy Research and Action, and downstream it feeds into Center for Social, Environmental, and Entrepreneurship. So these are the 2 new centers: Center for Social Innovation and Environment and Entrepreneurship, and Center for Policy Research and Action. I think time is limited. I'm just not going to read what is on the slide. I will pause here for 5-10 seconds, and you can read it, and then we'll move on to the other slide. We are very proud of our Academy for Conservation and Sustainability Studies, which really follows these integration of not only concepts, but also tools and approaches, and I referred to that a little bit earlier. And I'm also very proud of our 6 community conservation centers distributed throughout the Western Ghats and the Eastern Himalayas, which allow us to work with the local communities, which also allow us to take our students to the field and flow and facilitate two-way flow of knowledge, knowledge of science, modern knowledge, and traditional knowledge. And I want to close with this slide. And I think there is a video too, a 1-minute video after that. I think things are not looking good from several points of view, but particularly from the point of view of environment. And I need not say that we have all experienced more intimately some of the difficulties we are facing during the last 2 months. But I remain very hopeful. I remain very hopeful, as I was telling some of your colleagues, because of the generation, young generation. And that's why I've taken this time to spend a few minutes with you, or about an hour with you, because I really believe in your generation. I think, as I would say here, as the sun rises over Kanchenjunga and the first hummingbird comes out to feed on the flowers of rhododendrons, and the farmer gets up in the morning to ponder over the use of biodiversity, we have unprecedented opportunities. I think your generation has unprecedented opportunities that my generation did not have. My generation could not think of the ways we can bring these different disciplines together. Your generation can. My generation could not conceive how science can be applied to policy. Your generation can. My generation could not. Technology can transform our discipline. Your generation can. So I'm very, very hopeful we have ability, I think, to meet some of the pressing challenges we are facing. And I'd like to conclude with a video. Well, thank you very much. That's all I have to say. And I'll be happy to answer questions. I think I can answer only a few questions in the remaining time. But if you do write to me and if you have a question, I will respond.
Thank you so much, sir, for that lovely presentation. I'm sure everybody enjoyed that. We do happen to have a question here. So Ms. Pallavi Gupta is asking, how would you look at the current pandemic in terms of whether it can make humans in various fields more aware of the importance of biodiversity? How do these pandemics, you could say, help us humans understand the importance of biodiversity?
Yeah, I think, first of all, of course, we all realize that it's very, very unfortunate, that we are facing this pandemic. And on the other hand, I think it's very clear a pandemic has made us realize the value of nature, the value of maintaining harmonious interactions with nature for the humans. And that is a positive aspect. It's just too bad that something positive has come out at a huge, huge cost to humanity. It should not have happened that way. And so again, I think from that point of view, I remain very hopeful. I think we needed this rethink. We needed to pause, and we needed to think, how we want to move forward. And it's my hope that rethinking about everything, rethinking about our agriculture system, rethinking about consumption, rethinking about the basis of our economy. I hopefully, there are many, many thoughtful people, and there are many, many young people, who are in this movement, and I remain very hopeful.
That's really important. Well, we have another question, which is regarding the new draft of the EIA notification 2020. Well, although I'm not aware what exactly the context is, but what would you like to say about this new draft? Whether it is, how does it really affect the national mission on biodiversity and human well-being? Should we be worried about the future?
Which is the notification? Could you refer to that again, please?
Well, Mr. Abdullah, could you mention more about the EIA notification, since we don't really understand what is meant by that?
I think I understand that. I think there have been a spate of projects, I believe, have been cleared that have implications for the environment. I think these are environmental impact assessments for a range of developmental projects that have implications for biodiversity. I think certainly, there is a lot of concern about it. I think it's one of those things, that we are not. How should I put it? Well, I don't think any of us is against the development. I think very often we fail to consider alternatives, that there might be alternatives that you can proceed not only with development, but also with conservation in terms of, you can have development, you can have what you want without really destroying nature. And I think there's an urgent need for that. I would hope that it doesn't affect the mission. I don't think so. I'm very positive that it won't. I think, again, mission might be even more necessary so that we have a larger body of people, larger constituency, for sustainable development.
Yeah. Well, we have more questions. I guess we'll be taking these 3 questions right now. Since they're all interrelated, I guess we can answer them. So do you think that the delay in communication from Forest Department regarding permits hinder the biodiversity research? And how can we make the process more scientist friendly?
Yeah, this is a good question. In fact, we discussed this thing yesterday. I think there are a series of webinars that are being organized by an institute in Pune on National Biodiversity Act and all that. I think Dr. Vinod Mathur is doing a tremendous job in proposing, I think through his body, through various committees, amendments to the act that will facilitate some of this permits business and other things. So I think the government is thinking about the National Biodiversity Act, good intentions expressed. So all I can say is it's a work in progress. But this is, again, it's a matter of concern to us, and it would be one of the things the mission will take up.
True. Well, conserving biodiversity is like a chain of many institutions involved. It's not just us as scientists, but then there are common folk. How they would also be interested to know how they can contribute, and in return, how does that impact us as well? So I'd like to club the two questions that we have been asked. Is that how we as common citizens can contribute to this mission, and how really can we have a rural development along with the biodiversity conservation?
Sure. I think there are several ways. There are going to be several opportunities for participation. I think we are under the mission. We are going to have a lot of fellowships for undergraduates and graduate students. We are going to have a very active citizen science program. We are going to, I think, we don't want in the country, 4 or 5, 6, 7 centers where people, which are working in the field of biodiversity science. From 5 years from now, or 7 years from now, we want to see 50 centers in the country. So I think it ultimately comes down to the investments. I think what has happened is, we have neglected biodiversity science, and I think of our universities, how many universities and colleges we have, how many institutions of higher learning in the country we have, and how many have a curriculum or a course in biodiversity. I think it's very it's very apparent. I think we have emphasized branches of biology, molecular and cell biology, biomedical sciences, all very, very important, very critical. As a scientist, I love every field of science, but it should not be at the cost of biodiversity science, which is, in my mind, biodiversity science is the most critical science for humanity. I challenge anybody to come and tell me, no, this science is the most critical science for humanity. And because our concept of biodiversity science is very broad. We are dealing with all the issues we are facing in public health, agriculture, climate change. They all deal with biodiversity. We have natural solutions for many of these problems, and natural solutions are the most inexpensive solutions. And they also allow participation of wide sectors of the society, millions of citizens, and so on and so forth.
True. As you just said.
Just look at the term biodiversity. Biodiversity term was coined in 1986, but in India, the term biodiversity only about 4 or 5 years ago. You're too young to realize that, but I think many of the people in the audience, if there are people who are in their 40s and 50s, I think they will understand what I mean. Professionals, of course, knew the term, but I think ordinary citizens or lay people, they didn't. We are making progress. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. As you just mentioned, that there have been other fields that have gained more, you could say, an importance in the local community. What would you say about their impacts on biodiversity as a subject, as a field to be studied? How have these developments affected the developments in biodiversity, or maybe in the conservation aspects?
That's a very, very broad question. I think in that comment, I should say there are 2 or 3 questions packed. I think first is about the participation. I think technology would allow us to participate more fully. I think one of the things we want to do is we want to expand some of these biodiversity portals under the mission that will allow citizens to participate more in terms of documenting not in a scientific way, but in knowing about the biodiversity around them, how it can be used for whatever purpose they want to use it, whether it's agriculture or medicinal value or whatever. I think it's amazing. I think again, I'll come back to your question. Think in those terms. You know, why we are a superpower in information technology, right? But we are not a superpower in having a incredible biodiversity portal. We have India Biodiversity Portal, again, which a group of people, including myself, played a key role in establishing that. We have been struggling to find funding for that. Look at iNaturalist. Many of people from India have to go to iNaturalist. Take pride in creating something of our own and expanding. So those are the goals. And I know people who are developing very simple apps that you can go and identify a plant or butterfly in your neighborhood and making progress. Now, the second question in terms of the development, I think development, and we are thinking about those issues, as I mentioned, bringing in more biodiversity in agricultural system, can create not only more livelihoods, but it's also good for our health and it's also good for our sustainability. The amount of area that needs to be regenerated, the forests, many of our forests, as many of you know, natural habitats are actually in very, very poor state. We see that on the map, area under forest, but they need a lot of interventions. And that again has possibility to engage millions of people at a very low cost and with incredible benefits. So I think we need to think very differently. And of course, as a scientist, we need to demonstrate that potential.
True. So we have a few questions. Well, you must be aware about the recent, the pregnant elephant issue that has been raised in India regarding the news that we had was that pineapple, which had firecrackers in it, was supposed to be let out as a trap for wild boars to be trapped by the people who are farmers over there to prevent their crop destruction. But unfortunately, due to a certain mishap, it was ingested by the pregnant elephant, causing a huge uproar. And it actually raised quite a few questions regarding the agricultural practices in India and how exactly they are. What happens when we start putting more when we lose this this borderline between conserving biodiversity and promoting our crop production? Would you comment on that a bit?
Yeah, I think, human wildlife conflict is a huge issue in India. And I think, again, there are multiple causes for that. I think the habitats are shrinking, uh, agricultural areas are expanding, and I think we need multiple approaches, multiple ways to deal with this issue. I find most of the work on human wildlife landscapes, human wildlife conflict is not at the landscape level. We need to look at large landscapes. Where is the conflict? What are the poorest points? Where are the hotspots of conflict? And what do we do about it? Maybe those areas, we have to do something from the natural habitat management point of view. Maybe natural habitat cannot be expanded in that area. Maybe time to give up on that and let it be for agriculture. These are the sort of things you need to deal with these issues at the landscape level. You need modeling. You need to make predictions, anticipate what might be happening. I'm not talking about more science, but I think the planning is not there. The various sectors of the society are not coming together to have a consensus on how to deal with a particular problem.
Yeah.
And I don't have any specific solutions for any specific area unless I know the area very well. And but we know what is happening. Human incursions into natural habitats. And I think the question society has to ask for itself is, okay, if these things continue, if earlier we talked about environmental clearance, if these continues, and if incursions, agricultural incursions into the natural habitats continue, where is the limit? I mean, what is going to be left? We can visualize the world. Is that the type of world we want?
Yeah. So as the last question to today's presentation is that, we have had a lot of focus on rural development and conservation. Could you comment a bit on the efforts in India about urban biodiversity? What really is the scope of urban biodiversity and how can we conserve that?
The easy answer for that is that in about 40 minutes from now, there is a webinar on urban biodiversity. I'll send you the link and you can pass on the link to the people who have asked that question. And
Definitely.
let them get the information from specialists. In fact, Dr. Ravi Chellam, who works with me on the National Mission on Biodiversity, is the keynote speaker in 40 minutes. And I think he has thought through this thing. I hope he has, because he's going to give a talk. And so people will get a better answer from him than from me.
Definitely, sir. We'll definitely share that with everybody here present here and also to the entire ICRB community. I guess we are done with all of the questions, and we really thank you for devoting this hour to us, for committing to this talk today, despite the various technical issues we had. Thank you, sir, on behalf of the entire ICRB fraternity.
You're welcome, and thank you very much. And we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you all for being such a lovely audience.
Thank you.